get started here. I think it's 2
Yeah,
o'clock.
you can. We're live on YouTube now, so you can go ahead.
Okay, well, my name is Penny Wright, and I'm from the Rogers Memorial Library, as is Joanna Ferron, who sort of did the behind the scenes work, coordinating this event, which we are so grateful to HBO Productions for teaming up with us and with Harborfields Public Library, the West Hampton Library, the Quag Library, the Hampton Bays Library, and the Deer Park Library. So we're having an opportunity today to have you folks connect virtually with HBO's representatives from different parts of the production process, and they will offer insights into all aspects of television and film production, offer career advice for those interested in learning about the inner workings of the TV and the film industry. So we're very grateful to the Long Island Library Resources Council for making this possible for us. And that would include Tim Spindler, who is unfortunately not present here, but Alicia Ceron, I think Alicia is there. Yeah, you can raise your hand so we know who you are. Thank you so much for making this happen. And I'll just briefly introduce you to today's speakers. Katherine Feeney, so we can see Katherine. Where are you, Katherine? I don't see you, but you're there.
I'm here. Hey, everybody.
She's a member of the Directors Guild of America. She's a second assistant director. She's based in New York City, currently working on the Gilded Age. She's also working on HBO's Succession, The Deuce, and Crashing. A founding member of the all-female film TV production themed band called the Honeywagons. She spends her off time playing music and enjoying the outdoors. Katherine, thank you very much. You look like a very nice background there. I hope it's your real place that you live.
I'm cat sitting for a friend upstate, so, so I'm enjoying it while it lasts.
Looks like you're about to have band practice. I like that. Sorry, Lauri Pitkus, can you raise your hand, Lauri, so we can see who you are there?
Hi.
Yeah, she's been a New York-based location manager on feature films and television shows for over 20 years. Recent credits include the upcoming HBO limited series, The Undoing, 5 seasons of the Netflix series Orange is the New Black, and feature films Ocean's 8 and The Goldfinch. Her craziest and most challenging job was staging the chase scenes in Manhattan for the Bourne Ultimatum. Lauri, thank you so much for being here as well. We really appreciate having both of you. So I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to you folks, and we'll be listening until it's time for us to ask questions.
Thank you for having us. I'm not sure the nature of everybody's interest in film, or if they've come to this with any experience working in film, or if it's just strictly curiosity. But I can tell you that I started in this business over 20 years ago, mostly by accident. I went to college, was undecided about what I wanted to study, ended up with a philosophy major because I was interested in so many different things that I decided that I would select a major that allowed me to study a myriad, a variety of subjects. And when I graduated from college, I had a friend I was moving to New York City. I had no money and I needed to work right away. And I had a friend who was hiring people to hold parking spaces for trucks that would park. We would sit overnight, hold parking spaces, and the trucks would come in the morning. And those were the trucks that held all the equipment and people who would arrive to film a movie. So I was something that's now called the parking assistant or parking coordinator. From there, I was noticed by other crew people as being hardworking and sure.
What did I miss?
Oh, I can't see. I'm not sure.
Hello?
Oh, hey there.
Hello?
Sorry, did someone just join?
Yes.
Hi, we
Did I-
just started. There will be a time for questions a bit later.
What did I miss?
Not much. We just started. So please just listen in and we're going to take questions a little later.
You guys ready? So, so basically, I made my way. I was hired to work on set as a production assistant and realized that I wasn't terribly interested in telling pedestrians not to cross the street. But I did, I was particularly interested. I was always working many hours and very hungry. And I was most interested in figuring out how I could be one of the first people to eat lunch. And I realized that the crew people, the grips and electrics, and the craft people got to eat before everybody else. And so I did a short stint for a while working as working for a gaffer. I worked as an electrician on non-union and independent films for a number of years. So I know a bit about how electricity works on sets and how to run cable. And I didn't realize that would be such a good experience for what I ended up doing, which was ultimately being recruited by a friend of mine who was looking for people to scout locations for a movie in Queens in the near neighborhood where I lived at the time. Around that time, I was about 28 years old, and I was waking up and realizing that hauling cable and moving heavy lights, even at that age, was taking a toll on my body. And I was having a hard time seeing myself at the age I am now, still doing that. So when I was offered the opportunity to do something different, location scouting, I jumped at that and realized that all of the experience I'd had to that point really prepared me well for location scouting. It turns out that in addition to curiosity and an interest in taking photos and an interest in architecture, what's really helpful in terms of doing my job is knowing how logistics work. And so having worked as an electrician really allowed me to not just look for locations that aesthetically spoke to what our director and production designer may have been looking for, but also were practical on the level of being able to run power to a space or allow a certain number of people there, looking at fire rules. And I think in most of our disciplines in the film business, we all bring, we're all sort of jacks of all trades who settle in one place for one reason or another. And because it's such a moving, dynamic industry that requires the ability to react and change in real time, we all come to the craft with a lot of different experience. I will say I did teach a class years ago in Connecticut. There was a filmmaking incentive where I taught a class for aspiring scouts and location managers. And what was most gratifying and rewarding about it was a lot of the people were career changers. I did have some recent college graduates, but I had many adults who were thinking about entering the film business and coming from all walks of life. I had, former police officers, I had a librarian, some teachers, some real estate people, some photographers. And what was most evident in terms of teaching that class was the idea that everybody brought some expertise. So just as an example, we scouted, we dissected a script for, at the time I was working on a show called Nurse Jackie. And so as an exercise, we broke down that script and we looked at all the locations we would need. And it was really interesting to see how quickly everybody in that class latched onto one location or another and said, oh, I know someone who knows this and I know someone who knows that. And I think it really helped them to understand and for me to explain to you that a lot of what you bring to the table in terms of being in the film business is being resourceful and, utilizing the contacts and people, and the experiences you've had and bringing that to the table. What I love about the business is it's extremely collaborative. And even though my credits might run very far, I know a lot of people who are fascinated by finding out where films and TV shows are shot and often will watch to the end of credits to see who location managed or where things were filmed. I sometimes get random emails from people saying, hey, I saw you worked on LinkedIn. I get funny emails from people saying, where was this restaurant in that movie? So I know there's a little bit of a fascination with people finding out how that goes. So again, we run at the end of the credits, but what's great and what I love about my job is that I'm one of the first people on a show. So I'm often hired by a production designer or a producer. at the inception of a show, and I'm reading scripts long before even the stars are cast, or even before someone like Katherine Feeney comes on to break down the script and figure out how we're going to shoot it. So I work very closely with the director, the production designer, and the producers also. And very early on, we're out there, hoofing it, looking at locations, photographing things, cataloging different places, and making contacts with people, with whom we may end up having relationships with. And it's I feel that's why I've continued to do what I do for so long. The next step up the ladder for me would be production managing or producing. And a lot of people are surprised that I've stayed doing what I do for a living, but I think by trade, I'm probably most interested in documentaries, even though I don't work on them because there's not enough money to sustain my life, to pay rent. But what location managing does afford you or anyone who does it is an opportunity to be, just to observe and meet so many different people. I'm one of the few crafts in our industry that's a liaison between the public and the production. And so as such, I have to protect the public and the people who we deal with. I'm asking people to come into their private spaces or their businesses or their offices, and I establish, I have to establish a trust and confidence with those people. And it's my job to be the guardians of their property, in terms of having the relationship with the producers who want to come in and just sort of take over. We need to do this and we need to do that. So it's an interesting balancing act, but it's one that I really enjoy. I think I love film people, and they're my people and my community, but I also love the fact that I've met people from all walks of life, having done so many different feature films, that it's sustained me and kept me going all these years. So that's a very general overview of the job.
Nice.
I'll let you step
I'll
in,
jump.
Katherine.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Hey, everybody. Let's see. I think I first started becoming interested in behind the scenes things as a kid. My favorite movie was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And we took a trip to, I think, MGM Studios in Florida, and they had a Roger Rabbit exhibit. So you could they had recreated one of the big sets, one of the warehouse sets. And so you could walk into this set that was so familiar because I had seen it so many times on television. And they had some props and things lying around. And I think I was able to make a connection, at really probably the age of 8 or 9 between what you see on the screen and the tangible nature of that someone at some point stood on a set. That's what you're seeing in the movie and helped to make this thing. So I was always kind of interested. And then in high school, they introduced a communications program where we got to play around with some big cameras and do some very basic editing. And I was just totally hooked. I went to college at Fitchburg State College in Massachusetts. I'm from Rhode Island originally. And I studied video editing. So I thought that's what I wanted to do. I got out of school, realized I was a bad self-motivator. Working on film sets, it's kind of like riding a wave, right? You can't really procrastinate too much. And I found that I kind of needed that, certainly right after college. I got on my first film set by sitting and waiting around on a set in the middle of some equipment, potentially inappropriately, for a couple hours until I got the guts to go up to someone and ask if there was any way that I could help. And I did. And they brought me to the assistant directors, and I put on a walkie and I worked on a film unpaid for a couple weeks. And that kind of really got everything going. I think I knew from my first day on a film set that that's kind of how I wanted to spend my career. I worked on a few films up in the Boston area. And then I moved to New York in 2008. And I was a production assistant, the people on the street who ask you to cross the street because we're filming, or ask you to wait until we cut on a shot. And doing kind of what might be considered some menial but very important tasks, even getting meals for people, getting coffees for people, but all the while being on the film set itself. So I was a production assistant for 5 years. And then I joined the Directors Guild of America and became an assistant director, which is what I've been doing since 2013, I think. I love it. I love it so much. It's hard, it's challenging, but like Lauri said, it's really, I know I'm in the right place. It's so, some of the things I like about it I love about it really is that because we're freelance, we kind of go from job to job, and each job, each film or TV show usually will have different people, right? So you're kind of like starting fresh a couple times a year with the people around you and meeting new people and learning new things. I love how no matter how bad of a day you might think you have, or how unenjoyable a day might be, it's always going to contribute to your knowledge. I think the film industry, especially because it's constantly changing and we have to kind of go on different jobs all the time, it's compounding knowledge. Everything you do just adds to your experience, and there can never be a job you do that's detrimental to your experience as a whole or your career. You're just always learning things. I think I've always been interested in learning. I've been a learner my whole life, and this industry gives me an opportunity to always do crazy different things. I love the teamwork. It's like the ultimate problem solving every day on every job. And there are some really wonderful human beings in the industry, very kind people. I've been lucky enough to work with bosses who are nothing but supportive and genuine. And I really like that in the industry. I feel very supportive, and we all kind of, because we work long hours, we kind of, we solve these problems together. It leads to bonds that are, really, really strong. I love how there isn't a blueprint for every day on a set. You make a plan. One of the big things we do as assistant directors is we make the plan for the day. I love how you never know what can happen. You set up your plan, and whether there's a delay or something goes quicker or slower, or you have wrenches in the works during the course of the day and you have to solve problems and figure out how to fix it. As an assistant director, I love being kind of privy to all sorts of conversations that happen in and around the set. And as a second assistant director, which is what I do, we're basically, the assistant directors are in charge of the scheduling and the planning. So if you imagine that every TV show episode or every film begins with a script, really, we get our scripts. And like Lauri was saying, she'll be breaking down those scripts oftentimes at the same time or before, my boss starts, certainly before I start. And we kind of break things down to the simplest form. And we figure out what the best way is to shoot those scenes, because we don't shoot in script order 95% of the time. So there's so many considerations that you have to deal with when making a schedule, which is really what the assistant directors do, with the help of location managers like Lauri, and production designers and the director, of course. But it's the assistant directors who are in charge of putting on paper what we're going to shoot every day. We deal with actor availability issues. We deal with potential weather issues. We deal with time of year. Is it scripted to be in the spring, but we're shooting the scene in October? So, leaves on the trees, is that something we're going to have to replace in post-production? All of these things we're thinking about as we schedule location availability, all those sorts of things. So I love being a part of all the conversations, and we're also the director's, right hand team, right? So we help to implement the director's vision, as does Lauri, obviously, in finding locations and things. So we're involved in conversations with prop departments, with the locations department, with technical things like camera cranes and special equipment that might be needed to do a specifically challenging shoot, like in the middle of the woods. We still have to get all our gear out there, our cameras, our lights and stuff. And the assistant directors are part of figuring out the logistics of this as well, usually working hand in hand with the locations department. If you're having busloads of extras on a period show, how much time does it take to get all these people with their updos and these fancy ball gowns in the 1800s? How long does it take to get 100 people ready? We're talking to wardrobe about what that entails, the hair and makeup people about how long it's going to take to put the sideburns on the men, in a 1970s period show like the Deuce. We're working with the location department on I did a film called Extremely Loud, Incredibly Close, and we closed down New York City streets, Broadway, really from way uptown all the way down to Canal Street, basically over the course of an entire summer. And we filmed bicycle chases and a police car chasing a bike and car stunts. You know, we did that all in the middle of Manhattan, in the middle of a particularly grueling summer. So figuring out logistics and how you do these things is such a massive part of our job, but it's always different. You know, it's always different. And even season to season on shows, like for instance on Succession, I did season 1 and season 2, and that's kind of like a you know, a corporate family drama, if you will. But even between the 2 seasons, we had similar scripts, I guess, and similar source material kind of things. But the challenges from season to season were completely different. You know, we deal with how to manage high profile actors on set. What do we need to do to keep that person safe, but also to help the public, you know, be a part of what we're doing, but also not hinder our ability to shoot without having waving fans in the background, you know. So all these sorts of challenges are things that have come up for me in the last, you know, in the last 15 years being in the industry, and it's never the same really 2 days in a row. So I'm thankful for that, and I love it. And I kind of love the fact that I definitely started right from, you know, right from the bottom, which I think is a hallmark for a lot of people in the industry. You know, a lot of us started on entry-level jobs, like being a production assistant or you know, a locations unit PA, and doing things that we might otherwise consider menial, but are still a part of the big picture. Yeah, I don't know. I can't say enough about how much I love the film industry. You know, I enjoyed time off as well, but I do love it. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
I think we all want to quit our jobs.
Well,
Don't.
yeah, don't.
It's a cautionary tale.
Yes.
I have a general question. So, you know, you each do something different, but in your respective fields, are there various people who do exactly what you do? Are there people that are just sought after? In other words, in the industry, do you know who the good location managers are going to be and the good assistant second? In other words, do you all know each other? Is it one of those things where, oh, I want to try to get so-and-so, but she may be tied up with another show? Are people sought after in the same way that directors might be sought after, or other people in the industry?
Well, I would say, Lauri, if I may, that it's maybe a little less cutthroat, is that, I suppose. I mean, it's a very tightly knit community, as big as it is in New York City. I mean, because of the fact that we have all worked on so many different jobs, the amount of people overall who we have worked with is quite large. And a lot of those relationships are maintained over time. I think that what is sought out are perhaps specific experiences, right? You know, if, for instance, I've done, you know, a handful of period shows, and that brings a different level of expertise to what you're trying to do, just because, you know, even with the extras, let's say, which is a big part of what I'm in charge of as a second AD, is figuring out what kind of extras you need in a scene, how many people, and what they're going to look like. That's a big part of my job, and working with the director and figuring out that vision for the extras. So if you're not doing a period job, in theory, you know, people can show up for the workday. Extras can show up dressed in street clothes, and we'll walk down the streets of Manhattan, right? Whereas if it's a period show, all those people have to come in for a wardrobe fitting, you know, days prior or weeks prior, and that's a lot more to organize. So I think experience might be something that is kind of sought out, specific experiences. I do also think a lot of us stay within the same circles, more or less, in terms of the producer who might hire, for instance, my boss, who then hires me. I think a lot of those circles are pretty tight. But there is also a lot of work in New York. So I think that, or, you know, there was before this spring. So I think potentially, I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? I think that,
Yeah,
it yes and no would be my answer. Lauri, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's my take.
I would,
Sorry,
yeah, I was going to say, speaking as someone who's older than Feeney, so you guys need to know that in the business, Katherine is called Feeney. That's just,
yeah, call me whatever you'd like. It's all good.
So we all just know her as Feeney. But yeah, no, I would say, having started working at a time when the film business wasn't as busy in New York, you know, I started years and years ago, where there'd be like maybe 3 feature films and no TV going on. So I would say, briefly answer your question, Penny, yes, there are definitely groups of people who become good at a craft and end up being the first 10 phone calls, so yes, the same, you'll see the same, if you watch New York movies and look at credits, the same 10 prop masters, the same 10 set decorators or whatever. Now it's more like 50 because the business has expanded, and this is a really good time to be investigating, working in the film business. There's so many, technological advances, particularly in terms of post-production and visual effects, that are providing, a number of different types of jobs that didn't exist when I started, for sure. But I think the short answer to your question is yes, you will see the same people over and over again.
And one other quick question before we turn it over to everyone else who has questions, which is, what about now, the pandemic? Just quickly comment on how that's affecting your work, both of you.
It's changing it.
Go ahead.
We are trying to kind of reinvent, I guess, how many things happen on film sets. We have a history of being large groups of people in relatively small spaces. So it's been very interesting having conversations. We have conversations within the Directors Guild, within our unions, and about kind of how to proceed. It's kind of like a one day at a time thing. We are making plans on how to proceed, is I guess what I would say. And I think it is, depending, relatively doable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, specific to locations work, it's really changing. We were supposed to, on the Gilded Age, we're slated to shoot in 3 different cities. And now we're working very closely in this time that we have off with our visual effects coordinator to figure out, okay, how can we move we were going to build a train station, for instance, in a farm, on a farm field in outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And we're now talking about, building that set. So going to Lancaster and doing 360 photography so that we can then take those very detailed photographs of period, 1850s and 1860s train locomotive engines, et cetera, and then bring them to a backlot scenario where we can, sorry about that, I'm just looking at the gallery, so I'm not looking at myself. So where we can, recreate things. So we're actually reducing the number of locations due to the COVID crisis, because our directive is to travel less. Obviously the closer we can contain ourselves, the better off we all are, and to lessen the numbers. Feeney's job is going to be much different, because we're not going to have scenes with 200 people walking on our backlot set in Long Island. It'll be more like we're talking again to visual effects producers to say, okay, how do we utilize 20 to 40 background? Do we change their clothes? Do we photograph them in one place and then photograph them again with different clothes and mat them in? For instance, we have a large scene that was supposed to take place in Troy, New York, at the Troy Music Hall, which was also built, I believe, in the 1850s or 60s. And, originally we talked about trucking 200 people up there. And now we're talking about, if we can limit ourselves to 20 or 30 people and bring them to the Troy Music Hall and sit them in different sections with different clothes and photograph them different ways, will that bring the amalgam of a real scene? Like, will it come together, given that the real scene is dialogue between the 2 main actors, and that's just the background of it. But these are the kinds of discussions, creative discussions, that are going on behind the scenes in order to figure out how to most efficiently get back to work.
That's great. Why don't we move on and take other questions?
Okay, there were a couple of questions that came in on the chat, and one was for Lauri, and it was about, what type of documentaries would you like to make?
Oh, thanks for asking. Honestly, it surrounds people I've met in the past. I've just, from time to time, met very interesting people who are proactive. For instance, like years ago, I met a woman who worked at a church up in like Hunts Point in the Bronx. And I got into a lengthy discussion with her about charter schools. And we were both talking about how it's so fascinating that these people, there's a community of people who feel that the best place for them to put their money is into charter schools. And I kept saying to her, but it seems to me like there needs to be like pre-charter and in talking to the people that I meet in the neighborhood, it sounds to me like the stress is really on before school hours and after school hours. And so this woman was putting together a plan to try to raise money for a charter daycare program. And, you know, she was doing really interesting work. But when you take that all within the context of Hunts Point and how Hunts Point has been portrayed in the past in films, most notably as like an area where the meatpacking district has moved or prostitution goes on, you know, this was just like one person in that midst. And I meet people like this all the time. I love to talk to people, you know, not only about signing location contracts, but I'm vastly more interested in what goes on in their lives beyond the few hours or days that we might spend with them.
Interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah,
And
was
we
there
also
another
have
question?
yeah, we have a question, Katherine. You mentioned that you meet new people on each job. How do you apply to work on each of the jobs?
That's a great question. For my position, for me myself, my boss is the first assistant director, me being the second assistant director. I've been working with her, you know, on and off for about 10 years. So we kind of stick together where we can, and that's pretty common for assistant directors. You know, a first assistant director and a second assistant director will kind of team up and work together as much as we can. As a production assistant, honestly, a lot of it was word of mouth, right? One of the roles as a production assistant is the key production assistant, and you're the one in charge of hiring extra help on a day-to-day. So if you have a particularly big scene outside, you might need 15 or 20 extra production assistants to come in for the day just to help keep, you know, people off the sidewalks or whatever we might be doing that day. So a lot of that ends up being word of mouth. Sometimes for production assistants, we get names from some people we work with who might know someone who's a film student or might have met someone on the street. You know, occasionally people will stop by our trailers and someone will give me their information on a piece of paper and say, you know, I'd really love to come work on a set. And I got my first job on a film set because I found out that a girl I went to high school with was working on a TV show in Providence, in Rhode Island, where I'm from. And my mom said, well, you have to email her and you have to ask her, you know, if you can get on that show. And I said, no, Mom, come on, I don't want to do it. So, and I finally did it. And you know, this girl I went to high school with, we weren't particularly friends, but she was helpful and she got me an interview with the production office. So I'll always encourage people to, you know, just to ask, you know, just to ask whether you see a film set on the street, you know, it's okay. Or if you see, you know, one of the big production trucks with all the doors or something, or if you know someone who works on a set, or if you hear of something, I don't think it hurts to do outreach like that. I did a lot of that when I started out, because it can be tricky, you know, to get your foot in the door there. But if you see an opportunity arise, then I would always say just go for it, or at least ask. Yeah.
All right, we have a few questions on YouTube. So Ryan says, hello, HBO members. I just want to ask you, what is it like to be part of such a famous streaming service? This probably speaks to me a little bit more than you, Katherine. As a location person, you know, we're really the ambassador for any project. So it's so helpful to be knocking on doors or virtually knocking on doors by sending emails saying, hi, I'm working on a project that's an HBO project, as opposed to, you know, when you first start out, I think the worst project, it was probably one of my first jobs, was a job called Basket Case 2, which I defy anybody here. It would be fascinating if anybody had ever seen that, but it was a horror film about a guy who has an evil twin that's attached to him in a basket. And it's like, you know, how do you go and how do you represent that and try to find locations by saying, you know, we're doing a film where a guy runs around killing people and he has a twin attached to him in a basket. So obviously working for HBO is a far cry from that. And I would say it's wonderful to work for a company that is doing so well and has been doing cutting edge projects for so long, and ultimately is doing things like this. You know, I've worked for a lot of different companies, and I don't work for HBO. I mean, I don't know that all of you understand that Katherine and I and most of the people you see working on film productions on the street, we don't work for anybody. We are hired hands, and, you know, if we're lucky, we get to work for good companies over and over again, but, you know, we all need to eat and we take what jobs are available at any given time. So I will say this has been a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and I appreciate their commitment to quality and to high production values too. I've done, you know, a few period shows with HBO, and it can be really challenging to figure out how to create, you know, a non-contemporary world within a certain, with budgetary limitations. And I appreciate their desire to kind of do it right. I have worked on some other challenging or period jobs with other networks and other studios, and I found it to be a little more challenging. You know, HBO is really committed to upholding quality, and I feel very lucky that we're able to work within the generous parameters that they often give us to do what we need to do. Things like the amount of extras you might need in a scene. I keep going back to extras, but it's a very big part of my job. The amount of extras you might need in a scene, even, you know, how many additional staff we might need on a given day. You know, we're allowed to explore all those options, and work responsibly within the budget. But I always feel very supported when I work on HBO TV shows. Yeah.
And we had another question, Lauri. It was, what was your favorite location to scout?
That's a tough one. There's so many interesting ones. I'll have to say, I do know what the answer is. Hands down, a number of years ago, I was hired to do some location scouting for another unknown movie called Boys. It was a movie with Winona Ryder back in the day, and I don't even know how old she was at the time, probably 30 or so. And they had an entire unit. They wanted to shoot a scene on a carnival, like an amusement park. And so this was back in the days when US Air was still existing, and I was given an open ticket to fly up and down the Eastern Seaboard to research and interview carnival owners. That's probably the documentary that should have been made. So they teamed me up with a production designer who was a hilariously and wonderful, and we became very close friends, flamboyant 6'4" man with short blonde hair. And the two of us traveled up and down the Eastern Seaboard, looking for and interviewing carnival people. I went on more rides than I've never been on the Zipper ever since this ride. I was actually locked in a Zipper car for 20 minutes at one point. I met reptile handlers who I kept in touch with for years. It was a fascinating thing. And when we finally found the carnival that would be traveling, we were shooting this movie outside Baltimore, so we needed to find a carnival that was traveling south to north. They have a season, and a lot of these people, we needed to catch a carnival before it went dead for the season, because it would have been too costly for them to reunite everybody and take all their equipment out. So we found a carnival based in Rochester, New York, and they had been traveling from Wilmington, North Carolina. We caught them up in Maryland, and it was just fascinating on every level. We had to house the carnies, which was fascinating. We had to set up an entire carnival. I did see bags of bolts that just kind of hang out after the Ferris wheels put together. You know, I just saw so much. It was fantastic. It was great.
All right, there's another question from YouTube, and it's what piece of career advice would you give to your college self?
Yeah, that's interesting.
That is interesting. I would say, yeah, keep going. You're doing it all right. You know, like keep going, keep pushing through, keep working really hard.
I think mine would be to keep exploring your more creative self and to take that side of yourself seriously. I think it's one thing to be you know, to fall back on whatever your natural skill set is. It's another thing to develop something that's outside of your comfort zone, particularly if it's something creatively that you're interested in. I was deeply interested in photography in school, for instance. So, you know, there's a world where if I became more serious, maybe I'd be a photographer now. Or I've always been interested in writing, and I do think about the time I could have spent writing versus the time I've stood on set, you know, finding locations. So that would be my advice.
All right, and another one, how much money do you get paid for doing what you love?
It's a scale thing. So Katherine and I are both in the Directors Guild, and so our rates are, there's actual rate cards you can probably even look up online. We both work in positions that have scale rates. I think our scales are actually similar, Feeny. I think you and I are sort of in the same boat. But they basically, yeah, it's a couple $1,000s a week scale. But those of us who do this for a long time don't work for scale and haven't worked for scale for a long time. So you know, you have the ability to grow that rate. You know, a good location manager can make a couple $100,000 a year if they work all the time. And, you know, we have wonderful health benefits. So that does feed into, you know, we don't pay a lot for medical care. We have great dental, you know, with mental health covered. So that all goes into, you know, helping support, you know, I've been able to raise my kids and you know, own a home in Lower Westchester County, doing what I do.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, we did have a technical question. Do you use SLR film to film or shoot lately?
Well, I think on our Lauri, you guys probably use the, you know, the SLR stuff for your scouting too, right? But no, we'll shoot with usually the Alexa camera, digital camera, and then some of the shows I've done, TV shows, still shoot film actually, like Succession on HBO shoots film. So you're shooting film, which is amazing because, just as a side note, you know, you have your suitcase size mag of film that goes on top of the camera, and then the film, you know, spools into the camera from there, and that'll get you, I don't know, something like 6 minutes of film, and it's super heavy and big versus, you know, our little video cards that are about this big and, you know, can handle 2 hours worth of recording, which is what we use most of the time. So yeah, it's the big Alexa cameras for video usually. Yeah.
Could I ask a question about your lives while you are working on a job? And maybe it's different for each of you, but I mean, do you just say, see you in a week to your family? I mean, in other words, you have long days. What kind of lives do you have?
Go for it.
Yeah, I was just, I could speak. Yeah, we both come from different experiences. I have 2 kids. I will tell you, when my kids were very young, I thought for sure I could not manage a career in this business because the hours are obscene and the phone calls come all the time, and particularly from my department, and so is Katherine's actually, because we're there with the earliest people with hair and makeup. So we're there oftentimes. They may say they shoot a 12-hour day, but we're there 2 hours before when the trucks land, and we can often be there 1 to 2 hours after. So it's crazy. But what I found, I sort of stepped back and started scouting a lot more, and I was able to, you know, raise my kids by I was very, very particular. I became very particular about the jobs I would take. So for instance, working on Orange is the New Black, I was hired at the inception of the job to find the location where we would shoot the prison. So conveniently, I found it near my house. So I was able to work 5 seasons on a show that was a half hour from my house, which made it much easier. Nurse Jackie was a show that shot primarily on a soundstage and only went on location 1 or 2 days every 10 days. So I really started turning down work that would have meant, you know, I turned down the first season of Boardwalk Empire because I opened the script and it said exterior night, exterior night, exterior night. And I just knew I was never going to go work overnights and leave my kids. So, you know, I think I was fortunate in that I've had work to choose from. But I also think that a lot of women have come up in the industry in my time as I am. I was one of the few women I knew who had kids when I started doing this. And since that time, I have met many peers who come up and are now, you know, hiring people. And I'm very candid on job interviews, you know, when I see red flags that for me are like, oh, that's going to really push my boundaries to a place that is not tenable for me as a parent to work. I will talk about that in interviews, and I may have lost some jobs as a result of that, but I just have been doing this so long, and I've had many producers. I remember having my daughter, and 4 weeks later, someone called me and said, oh, we're shooting at the soundstage around the corner. You can just come and you'll bring your baby and nurse while you're here. And I said, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like, that's never going to work. So, you know, I think if you can be clear about your parameters, there are more people who are becoming more lifestyle respectful. But that said, you do need to be committed and prepared to, you know, work a 60-hour work week when you're shooting.
Yeah,
about
it's tricky. Yeah. Sorry, say that again, Penny.
I was going to say, what about you?
So I don't have kids, so it's infinitely easier for me, and I will use the term easier, but yeah, luckily, usually, at least for me, I'll probably know about anywhere between a month to 3 months before I start a job, roughly when exactly I'll start that job. So that's your time to do all the things that you won't be able to do when you're working. I mean, we have 2 stages to our jobs. There's the prep stage where you're preparing for filming, and then there's the actual filming stage. On television shows, you'll alternate. You'll prep for, let's say, a week and a half, and then you'll film that episode for a week and a half, and then you'll go back and you'll alternate like that. Films, you'll prep for months, and then you'll film for months, right? But it is true. I mean, we do really work, even when we're not shooting, really upwards of 12 hours a day, maybe 10 hours. 10 hours would be probably like a kind of a short day, even when we're prepping, and certainly when we're filming. It's no joke. I mean, those hours are very real. And like Lauri was saying, our phones do ring all the time, and we're expected to tend to those people and those phone calls. So it is all encompassing. I think at this point, it's something that I'm used to. I think at first I was just kind of okay with it. I mean, I was working on a film set, as a 21-year-old, and I was just so happy. So I think my passion and the excitement of actually working on film sets is what kind of got me through my first, 5 or 6 years. And then, we just kind of know the deal now. So you're able to get your doctor's appointments done before you start a job. You're able to get your oil changes done before you start a job, do all those things that, you won't be able to do. For me, it's turned into an interesting exercise in time management and really being in charge of planning your life out. So I'm used to it, but I mean, it's done things like it's kind of forced me to take up meditation, for instance, or like finding ways to keep myself and my mind and my body healthy while we endure these hours, but otherwise it's a commitment, and you can kind of, I kind of like ceremoniously wave goodbye to my friends before I start a job, and, I'll see you on the occasional weekend. Otherwise, next year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard.
Right, there's like a really related question to what you just said. Have you faced any challenges as a woman working within the industry? If so, how have you dealt with it? And what would you say to a young woman pursuing a similar career?
I think Lauri, probably no, Lauri, I was gonna say, you go ahead. You probably have
Well, I've seen, I started working, back when it was very old school, and I was one of the few women on jobs. I've been the only woman in a van many times for whole jobs. I've been the only woman at the tech scout, at the director's meals, whatever, when we go scouting for a long time. I've always found that to be an asset. I've never encountered any situations where I felt that I was treated unfairly or otherwise. I think it was a welcome addition to the teams that I've been a part of, and I've been treated with respect throughout. The nice thing about being freelance is I've always felt that at any moment, if I was not treated respectfully, I am allowed to walk away and say, I don't like it here. I haven't had to do that, except for an instance where I wasn't being paid in a timely fashion, and I did leave that job. But I would say now is a great time to be a woman interested in the film industry and entering the film industry, because along with, working for advocacy of to try to, have more people of color and more people from different backgrounds join our industry. Certainly the DGA, the Directors Guild, which we're both part of, is primarily a union of directors, and they're really at the forefront of answering even to the Academy Awards, whatever the hashtag is for the Academy Awards. They're trying very hard to round out the cadre of directors that show up over and over again, in these popular films. And being a woman is certainly, I think, an asset at this point in terms of being hired and working as an addition. I will say also, there are just more women, producers and line producers. I've worked for women over and over again, and I'm happy to say that most of them are advocates of, bringing other women up through the business.
Yeah. I would say for me, certainly starting out as a PA with other people in their early 20s, it was a bit of a boys club at times. This was, in the early 2000s. I just kind of like kept with it and didn't let it get to me. It would be like Lauri was saying, it would be me and then, 5 other male production assistants, and we were the staff on an entire job for, months and months. And so I think the advice I would give is do your best to let it empower you that you're a woman in this environment, or that you're a woman trying to break into the environment, and if you have the opportunity to work with other women in the industry, especially successful women in the industry, don't hesitate to have a conversation or ask them directly for advice. Or, I think there's a wonderful sense of camaraderie that I've at least seen develop over the last few years amongst women on film sets, and even in my short 15 years in the industry, I've seen it come a long way from where I started. I'm proud of that, and I'm empowered by it, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Be proud to be proud to be a woman in the industry, or a woman trying to get in the industry. Let it empower you. Yeah.
Okay, we had a question about the process of joining a guild.
Yeah, Lauri,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's interesting, right? Because we're both in the same union, but the processes by which we entered are different. To join, at least for me, to join as an assistant director, you basically have to submit what's called a book, right? So it's a binder or several binders that that kind of prove how many days you have worked on set in a certain capacity. So for second AD, if you're a production assistant, you have to show that you've worked 600 days on a film set, which is a long time. It's several years. I think these days there's a lot of work in New York, so you can work year round if you want to. So anyway, so you submit proof of 600 days of working on a film set, which is a combination of one call sheet, which is the day's plan that you get at the beginning of every day. There's a thing called a production report, which is basically what we make after the shooting day that details all the details of the shooting day, what time people showed up, what we filmed, and all that stuff, as well as a pay stub. So you submit these 3 items for one day of work, and you do that for 600 days. And you have to fill out a couple other forms with the Directors Guild, and they'll go over it and approve it. And then you can join as a second AD, which is a category. If I want to join as a first AD, which is would be the next step for me, I have to submit another book that proves, I think, 250 days of work as a second assistant director, and then I'll be eligible to join the next tier. It's hard, but I think it's important to spend a lot of time, and certainly as an assistant director, to spend a lot of time as a production assistant on set, because we don't really have formal training within my job, with my job title. Really, there's no formal training. There's the occasional seminars, and it's becoming a lot easier to learn about what we do, but there's no formal training. So you kind of like learn in the field on film sets, which is why the day qualification is so high.
Yeah, I was gonna. We under location managers actually fall under the auspices of second assistant directors in the union. So we need to do the same thing. We have to submit a book with 600 days. But what I did want to remind you, Feeny, and also that something that exists is there's a great program called the DGA training program.
Oh, yeah.
That's sponsored specifically by our union. You probably know better than I do. It's competitive. I don't know how many applications they get a year, but basically it's more than an internship. It's basically, they guarantee you, I don't know how many handful of DGA trainees work per year, but they will place you on as a paid employee on different productions over the course. Is it 2 years or 3 years?
It's about 2 years, 2.5 years. Yeah, usually.
That's pretty amazing, because they basically train you to do the ins and outs of Feeney's job. So you would be shadowing someone like Katherine and understanding exactly how all the paperwork works, and it's really an asset. So the people that come out of that training program, first of all, they know everybody on set, because one of their jobs is to confirm who's on the call sheet and production reports every day. So it forces them to, if you're a shy person, you can only be shy for about a day, or you wouldn't be able to do the job. So, they get to know every single person on set. It's a pretty fantastic program.
It is, yeah. It's kind of a fast track, basically, to entry. They do get a lot of applicants every year. I'm sure, at least over 1,000 applicants, and I think they end up. I believe they do the programs quarterly. So they might accept like 5 people per quarter. You have to go and take some sort of exam. I'm not really sure what's on that exam, but it is a program that anyone can apply for. And then that would be on the Directors Guild of America's website. It's called the DGA training program. Yeah, the training program. Yeah, anyone can apply for it. It is certainly competitive. You have to come in for interviews, I think, and it's like a multi-stage process to get in. But most shows are assigned a trainee. You know, I've had several, and it's great because they usually know a little more than production assistants because they've been kind of more formally taught by the Directors Guilds with seminars, and they'll have DGA members come in for the trainees and teach them about various aspects of filmmaking and scheduling and the very specific things that assistant directors do. Yeah, it's a great program.
Well, I don't know if there are more questions, but I'm sure everyone joins me in thanking you, Lauri and Katherine, or may we call you Feeny?
Sorry.
Whatever you'd like.
Really?
It's all good. Don't worry. No, that's me. It's me. It's me. It's me.
I think rarely have we all seen an hour just pass by so quickly. And what you have told us is just so fascinating, I think, to every single one of us. So we thank you two very much for being with us. We thank Tim and Alicia for making this possible, Joanna and Pat for helping do the technical things and more. And so it's just been a wonderful opportunity. So I think we can all thank you. So much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Amazing.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye. We hope you'll come back.
Take care.
Thanks.
Yeah, no,
I'd love
thank
to.
you. This is the closest we've come to being at work.
It's true.
This is like, so this is, it's fun to be in touch with it again. Thank you.
It's nice. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. But I have a question. I sent it to you.
What's your question? You can ask now.
Okay, how do you send movies to the TVs?
That I don't know.
It's a good question. Yeah. I don't know. We kind of
Magic.
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of all of our shooting days, I can say that we take either a big pile of film canisters or several, little boxes of memory cards, and we bring them to basically like the film developing or the film processing place, and we don't see it again. I don't see it again until it's on TV.
Until it's on TV.
I think that's a world of yeah.
What's a film canister?
So it's the metal box that you would put reels of film in. It's just a way to store.
Wait, you mean it's that
shot.
piece of the projector?
It looks like that. It looks exactly like that. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know much more than that, sadly.
Well, this has been great, and we're just under our time here, so we've got maybe 50 more seconds, and then we're gonna.
Well, goodbye.
Goodbye. But thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
we have
Penny. Thanks,
one
everybody.
more quick question if you want to answer. As a college student, what is the best way to get an internship in the film industry?
Did they say it was over?
Yes.
That's a good question. I will
Were
say
there a lot of
I'm a
kids?
little detached from that. I think because it was a while ago that I, back in college, we were like, I guess, looking at newspapers and stuff to try to find film jobs. But if there's like a guidance office or if there's a film program at the school, they should probably have some resources on where they go and suggestions of like bulletin boards or job boards or something where you could search. That would be my thought, I guess.
All right, perfect.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you
Is
so
this
much.
someone in Long Island, going to school in Long Island or in Nassau County by any chance?
I'm from Long Island, but I go to school. Well, I was going to school in Rhode Island.
No, I know. I feel I hear you on the was going to school. No, I would echo what Feeny is saying, and that starting with the career counseling office is probably the best bet. Typically, when films and TV shows are shooting in, what we think are distant locations, oftentimes we will reach out, particularly my department, because we have boots on the ground first before everybody, and we often hire a large group of people just to help us do things like park trucks and hold parking lots and some of the really entry level kind of things. But we do reach out. There is some outreach that goes on, especially with these HBO jobs. They have a whole community liaison kind of, not department, but directive to do things like what we're doing today, and even further to try to connect people to jobs in the film business.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Thanks.
Yeah,
All right. Thank you so much, ladies.
All right. Thanks,
so
Penny.
much.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Be well, everyone.
Bye.
Absolutely
Thank you.
super. Absolutely great. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.